Hi there. Continuing on our Sandwich Generation series, today's topic is planning and having the difficult conversation with our aging parents. So I want to pose a question to you. If one of your siblings called and said dad had a stroke and he needs care immediately, do you have a plan in place to make sure that he has care from a physical standpoint and then also a financial standpoint? What do? Your sibling lives in another state, you live close by. Do you have a plan on how you're going to help your dad? It's not the worst case scenario, but it's definitely an urgent need that needs to be addressed immediately. Have you had this conversation with your parents? Let me tell you a little secret. I wasn't prepared. My husband and I were definitely not prepared for this scenario. My father-in-law passed away in November. My mother-in-law was sort of on her own, and my sister-in-law was living in the house and she became ill. We had no plan in place on how to help care for my mother-in-law, how to make sure that she was getting her needs met, not staying alone at night. And this could have easily been avoided if we had planned ahead, if we had had a conversation ahead of time with other siblings, with other family members on what would we do if this scenario happened. This is not a woe is me story. This is a cautionary tale. My husband and I did not have this conversation with my in-laws. I want to say that we briefly may have scathed over it a time or two, but this turned into a very stressful situation because we didn't want to have these uncomfortable conversations up front. And I can tell you, having the uncomfortable conversation up front would have been way easier than the massive stress that we faced once we were in the middle of this experience. So the moral of the story is start having the conversation now while everybody is healthy and capacitated. These are not easy conversations to have. People don't want to talk about when they're sick or when they can't do for themselves anymore. But wouldn't you rather have the conversation now than have to make these choices for your parents later? And I'm sure they would feel the same. You may be alleviating some stress off of their minds right now if you approach this conversation sooner rather than later. Communication is really key with all of this. Having an open conversation and approaching this from a loving standpoint, I think, is the best way to go. You're not asking your parents, what they're going to leave you and, are they going to sell the house or are they going to give you all their jewels when they're in diapers? What you're really asking is, how can I care for you the best I can when you might not be in a position to be able to tell me? So let's have this conversation early. I would want to say often, but you don't have to have it often, but early, sooner rather than later, today rather than tomorrow, because we don't know what's going to happen. And inevitably, we're all going to the same place. So having these open conversations now is going to make all of our lives a whole lot easier and have the last times possibly in our lives with our parents be happy and joyful versus stressful and upsetting. So I hope this tip was helpful, or this little story was helpful for you. We'll talk more again on our next video about some other things that nobody wants to talk about. That was terrible.